where PV modules will be produced in future. And the answer is, I'm quite sure Chinese will lead. They will lead the next 10, 15 years. They will produce a couple of terawatts of modules yearly in China. But I'm also quite sure that in US, India, and in Europe, we will at least produce PV module for our self-consumption. That means not at terawatt level, but at 3-digit gigawatt level. So for example, in US, 100 gigawatt module cells and wafer ingot. Same thing in India, maybe more than 100 gigawatt. And in Europe, we will need also 100 gigawatt for our self-consumption yearly, maybe more.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Rado Kopecek from ISC Konstanz. This is a discussion I've been really looking forward to for a long, long time. Rado, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Peter. I look forward to discuss with you the future of PV.
Indeed. And I don't think there is any other person on this planet who has spent so much time in solar as you. So what made you fall in love with solar back in the day, and when was that exactly?
Yes, I'm very passionate about solar. So I started in 1994 at Max Planck Institute in Stuttgart, working with Professor Werner and Professor Quaiser. And already at that time, I had the feeling that PV will become extremely important, because we just need a reliable energy source and an energy source that is endless. The sun is delivering energy without asking for a bill. This is what German politicians said one day. And I completely agree. And I'm quite sure that in the next couple of years, PV will become the dominant energy source. So I started in 1994, and then I did my PhD at the University of Konstanz about thin film photovoltaics. And in 2005, we have founded ISC Konstanz together with some crazy people from the university, because, 2005, that were the golden time of photovoltaics in Germany, and companies like Centrotherm, Rena, and also producing companies like Sunways and SolarWorld were looking for partners that are working close to the industry. So in 2005, we have founded ISC Konstanz. We are developing solar cells and modules, and then our mission started. So I'm involved now for more than 30 years in photovoltaics, and as you said, quite passionate about it.
We need more people like you. And if we can unpack your work at ISC Konstanz, what was the main goal when you guys incorporated it, and how has that goal maybe shifted over time?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So as I told, we started in 2005. And at that time, the German machine builders and German producers were very successful. So I already named a couple of them, for example, Centrotherm for high temperature processes, for wet chemistry, then a partner for screen printing, to put the metal on the solar cells. Pacini from Italy were very successful. And together with them, we have helped the German industry to incorporate the solar cell processes into their production lines. And there were a couple in Germany, even in my town in Konstanz, where I live. There was a very famous company at that time, Sunways, that started PV production in 1990, I think. And we were assisting them to get the most innovative solar cell technology at that time. And we also had a big cooperation with Bosch Solar and developing so-called bifacial N-type technologies. We already had the idea at that time that solar cells not necessarily have to be only monofacial to produce electricity from the front side, but also from the rear side when you open the solar cell and make the module transparent also from the rear side. And that was the technology that we were promoting. Unfortunately, from 2010 China realized that photovoltaic technology will become very dominant, and they decided to install production capacities in China themselves. And that led to the fact that very soon in 2011-12 was a big overcapacity of solar cell production. With that, the German manufacturers somehow had to stop production and filed insolvencies or stopped, like Bosch Solar stopped in 2013. From that point on, we had to change our business model because ISC Konstanz was founded for supporting the machine builders and solar cell and module producers. And then when everything out diffused to China, we changed our business model and were supporting also international companies, first in China, but also now in India, to set up PV production there. So basically, we are still doing the same thing as at the beginning, developing highest efficiency, advanced solar cell, very close to the industry, but currently now also supporting big companies in India to set up gigawatt production lines.
Wow. And how should one imagine how this whole process goes? I assume, as with any technology, you have the R&D stage where you develop some sort of technology, then you start testing it with the industry if it's a fit, and then maybe some smaller pilot production, and then you scale it out fully? Or what is the typical steps that you need to go through until you have a fully scaled PV production plant?
Yes. So basically, you already described it very well. But let's say the speciality of ISC Konstanz is that we are working very close to the industry. That means we have in our laboratory so-called pilot line, which consists of the equipment that is used in PV production. The only difference is that we don't have automated production. The automation are our students or PhD students or our engineers. And we are starting to make R&D at a rather higher technology readiness level. That means at a stage where the solar cells that we are developing are already useful for being in the production, maybe a little bit more expensive than the current solar cells, but already at higher efficiency level. That means, there are many institutes out there, the most famous, for example, Fraunhofer ISE, or in France, INES. And they even are looking at technologies with a very low technology readiness level, at, for example, perovskite tandem solar cells, which are not stable yet, and they have to go a long process until industrialization. This is what we do as well, but our main focus is really based on technologies that are already very close to industrialization. And that's very important for ISC Konstanz because we don't have any basic financing as the other institutes. And that's why to co-finance our publicly funded projects, we need to have a lot of money from industry. Basically from technology transfers or from direct bilateral developments with the industry. And that's why we are more or less skipping the very first phase when we are looking at materials that maybe will never come into production and starting from processes that are 1 or 2 years before industrialization and try to develop them into the industrialization stage. So we are doing R&D at ISC Konstanz, but R&D which is very applicable.
Okay, and you actually mentioned a term here that I would like to double check and define again. So technology readiness. It means in your terms how far you are from the actual real world application of the manufacturing, right?
Absolutely. So technology readiness level, I think it comes from the space technology defined by NASA. Technology readiness level 9 means that this technology is already at production at large scale. In PV, this means at gigawatt scale. Technology readiness 8 means it's one stage before. It's tested, for example, already in pilot production. So it's a smaller quantity than in production. And technology readiness level 7 is that it's not used in a pilot line, but for example, in a laboratory environment, in beaker processes rather than in inline processes. And of course, technology readiness level 1, this is like at the very beginning, you are looking at Grundlagenforschung, we say in Germany.
customer research.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so we've discussed the technology readiness, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about the trends that you have seen since 2005, and what were the catalysts of the major shifts, for example, for the industry to leave Germany, and then how actually in 10 years quickly China actually scaled up production capabilities as well, and maybe where do you see this heading in the future in terms of the global dominance of who's going to produce the modules, and who's going to be more dominant in solar?
Okay, I think that's a question for half an hour answer.
We have all
But
the time in the world.
I try to keep it, at the beginning at a very simple level, and maybe we can dive into more details later. So what is important to say is that the solar cell industry within the last 40 years is based on evolutionary processes. And that means it started with crystalline silicon and processes on the crystalline silicon, and it's still a crystalline silicon based technology which is dominating, even though there were a couple of times when producers that were producing so-called thin film semiconductors like thin film silicon or cadmium telluride or CIGS were claiming that the crystalline silicon era is over and now it's time for thin film technologies. This was never realized because crystalline silicon is also extremely well known from the semiconductor industry. And in order to have really something relevant and big in production, you also need interdisciplinary areas or industries that a technology can become strong. So the crystalline silicon is the basis of all solar cell processes. And what happened in the last 40 years that actually the material got much better and better. We started with so-called multi-crystalline material when the silicon material still had many grains. And at the moment, the material that is used for production has already semiconductor grade properties. That means is very pure and has also very ideal properties as high lifetimes, or you can sew it to very thin wafers and very stable, things like that. So on the material side, the developments were that the material developed from an unpure so-called multicrystalline silicon with many grains to now semiconductor properties, what you also know from TV, for example, when you look at these big wafers in semiconductors and so on. And on the solar cell production side, it was also the 14 years an evolutionary process. So nowadays, the process is based on high temperature processes for diffusions. That was also the case at the beginning. Then, for example, you are using for anti-reflective coating of the material silicon nitride dielectrics, and for contacting of the material some metals on the front side and on the rear side. And this has been done in the past, for example, by evaporation, and now screen printing is being used. You know, you have like some metal paste which you are just pushing through a screen. Like, for example, printing also pictures on a t-shirt. You are putting metal fingers on the front side and rear side of the cell. And this, let's say, didn't change, only that the changes were very incremental. So at the beginning, for example, with the screen printing, very thin fingers have been printed. And now the technology became so advanced that only little micrometers thin fingers are being printed on the material. So the material was improving, the processes were improving in time, and also the structure of the solar cell. At the beginning, it was a so-called aluminum back surface field solar cell, when you had an aluminum on the rear side and phosphorus diffused front side. And that gave about efficiencies of below 20% on cell level and about 18% on module level. In time, this was improved by using, as I already said, better material and also better processes. Then after aluminum back surface field, so-called PERC, solar cell came into the market, which was dominating the market 5 years. And now also the dominance of the PERC technology is over, and now so-called TOPCon technologies are taking over. And the difference from PERC to TOPCon are now a little bit more pronounced as from aluminum-based surface field to PERC. Now the material properties changed from P-type to N-type. So at the beginning, the doping of the material was done with boron or gallium, that is the P-type doping, and now the doping is done by phosphorus, or now rather even with antimony. These are the newest generation of N-type wafers. And this doping coming from P-type to N-type makes the material more qualitatively higher.
So is it
in
more durable,
lifetime.
or is it easier to print, or what is the main property, the main benefit?
The main benefit is that the lifetime of the electron hole pairs in the material is higher. That means actually the quality of the material to produce electricity is higher. So it's not more durable. Let's say the potential of producing higher electricity in the material is higher.
So basically the same panel is capable of producing more electricity. A 500-watt panel can produce more than the typical 20%.
Absolutely. So the electricity is increased, and that is basically because of the higher current, but also because of the higher voltage. That means the energy that is coming out of the panel is higher because of the higher quality of the wafer. And you just mentioned also duration of the lifetime of the panel. This is also increased, but not by changing from the material from P-type to N-type, but many other things like, for example, changing the so-called BOM, the bill of material of the module, to higher durable materials. For example, in the past, the modules were made with the front side glass and a plastic on the rear side, because plastic was, of course, delivered at lower cost. And now most of the modules are made by double glass. And this is the reason is because the thinner glass is now even lower cost than the plastic in the past. In addition, you can also harvest the electricity by illumination from the rear side. These are the bifacial modules that I was talking about.
So the benefit is double. So you let some light through and it bounces back, and then basically you're harvesting from both sides of the panel.
Yes, I mean, you don't have a double power output or electricity output, because the sun still comes from the front side, and the rear side gets only the energy, or let's say the sunlight from the so-called albedo, from the reflection on the rear side. So you can increase the electricity output from the panel from 5%, depending on the conditions, up to 20%. And this is quite high.
And that's still a huge improvement. And if you are looking into applications like AgriPV, then this is exactly what we need, right?
Absolutely. And you just mentioned it. AgriPV is a very important application because you make the double use of the land. You can have agricultural use and harvesting also electricity. And there the bifacial modules are especially beneficial because you are putting the modules quite high from the ground. And then the albedo, so the reflection from the ground to the rear side, can be very high. And there are also other applications for AgriPV where you are even putting the modules vertically, where you can have the sun from east and west shining into the modules and having spaces in between the modules where you can make agriculture. And so I believe, especially in Europe, where we have not such a big space, AgriPV will be extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, I just spoke to a company who's making mounting systems and also producing quite a lot of applications in AgriPV, Solar Geek from Israel. And they basically said that where they feel AgriPV is now is really ready to take off and ready to be mass deployed, right? Because we have countries such as Italy where you already have limited uses of land, so you cannot just go fully greenfield and install whatever, wherever. You need to combine it with agriculture, and I think that's going to be a huge catalyst in the next 2 to 5 years for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe one thing to be mentioned about the space for installations of PV modules. There are some myths out there that you need the area, let's say half area of Germany to be covered by PV modules, that you can produce 100% electricity need for Germany from the modules. This is not true. It's actually only a little fraction of Germany, which will be about 1% to cover 100% electricity from PV. We don't need 100% electricity PV because, of course, it has to be combined with wind and storage and other sources. AgriPV is still beneficial because you just are not only making use of the double land, but also are protecting actually also the crops and other things to be harvested on the field by the modules. So there are many, many advantages. And I think even if we would not apply AgriPV, maybe Italy is a different, because you just said it, Italy has not a big space for applying modules besides of AgriPV. Even without AgriPV, we would be able to produce 100% electricity renewable in Europe, not covering big spaces, only 1% of the space. But anyhow, there are so many benefits in AgriPV that I believe that's really the future.
And also it's important to highlight that with the 1% land use that you mentioned, that's under current technology, right? And the technology improves, what is the percentage, 1% per year in terms of efficiency?
It is 0.5% a year.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it will now come a little bit to a saturation because crystalline silicon efficiency now, which you see on the market, the modules have in average 23% efficiency. There are module makers like ICO, which are producing the modules with the highest efficiency, which is about 24%. Now it's reaching the limit of crystalline silicon solar cells, which will be, also theoretically, it's 29%, but I think practically it will be about 26% module efficiency. So there are still 5 years to go for the 0.5%, or 6 years in this case, from 23 to 26, with the 0.5% efficiency absolute enhancement. And depending on what will be next, crystalline silicon certainly will be still the dominating technology, and there are other possibilities how to increase the crystalline silicon technology over this limit. Is so-called tandem solar cells that you put above the crystalline silicon another semiconductor which actually absorbs the sunlight at a different wavelengths. And that's why you can go over this 26% efficiency, going above 30%, for example, so-called perovskite tandem solar cells with crystalline silicon. But this technology, we have discussed about the different technology readiness levels. This technology is at the lower technology readiness level at the moment than the crystalline silicon. So yes, you are right. The efficiencies are still growing with this 0.5% efficiency enhancement, but they will come to a saturation in the next 6 years.
So basically, but once we reach saturation, there will probably be a new technology that will replace the existing one, and hopefully the efficiency gains will continue year by year if all goes well.
I don't think so.
No?
But I mean, there are, I would say in PV, two different groups. I belong to the group which believes that when we reach this 26% in 6 years, there will be still no technology available, at least, let's say, for the mass market. Of course, there will be niche markets which will use already 30% efficient technologies. Actually, this market is already in the space. The satellites are using more efficient solar cells from so-called gallium arsenide solar cells, but this is a very expensive technology. But for terrestrial application, you need, of course, a low-cost technology, which you can apply on large areas. And as I already mentioned, this perovskite crystalline silicon tandem technologies, they have the potential to supply efficiencies above 30%. But after 6 years, I don't think they will be already at that level that they can completely replace the crystalline silicon technology only. So we are talking about different timescales. So what I believe is that after 6 years, we come to a saturation at 26%, but this does not matter because PV is already the lowest cost electricity source, or by then it will be the lowest cost electricity source, even if you compare it with wind. At the moment, wind energy and solar are more or less leading the race in lowest cost electricities, even if you combine it with storage solutions. And there are studies that after 3 years, PV will start a dominance worldwide, globally. And the reason is because you still have this incremental growth of improving the efficiencies. The wind technology does not. It's only increased in, you are building only larger turbines and so on. Wind has more ways to lower the electricity costs. That means wind in the next 3 years will be the ultimate lowest cost electricity that you can produce on our planet, and even combined with storage. And then the question is why we should increase the efficiency. And even if it comes to the efficiency limit, you will start to produce electricity for, let's say, 1 cent per kilowatt hour. So the question is why you should produce for 0.1 cent per kilowatt hour when you are already at this very low level. So what I think will happen that the efficiency will stay stable for at least the next 10 years. But of course, there will still some mechanisms which can decrease the production of electricity. You just make the module cheaper, for example. So instead of using silver, using copper.
So basically, if we make improvements on the material science side, that should reflect on the economics and the cost saved at the production side.
Yes. At the moment, I would say why solar cell technology is getting on system level so quickly low cost is basically also because the increase of the efficiency. Because if you increase the efficiency of the panel, you are also saving automatically in the balance of system. BOS is called. That means if you have a very powerful panel at the same costs, you can decrease the size of the system to have the same energy output. That's why if you increase the efficiency of the module, you are automatically saving also in the balance of system costs. And that's why it's going extremely fast, the decrease of the levelized cost of electricity. But when it's, let's say, after 6 years at a certain efficiency, the cost reduction will go slower, but still you can reduce, for example, the cost of the panels by introducing alternative metallization schemes, for example, going from silver, which is used now for metallization, to copper.
So basically the rules of improvement or the opportunities of improvement are not quite the obvious, but on the secondary level. So basically I've been talking to a lot of EPC friends of mine, and now everybody is saying that we should step away from us installing solar panels and forgetting about them to a more zoomed out approach and having a system-wide view of, okay, I install the solar panels, I connect them to a battery pack, and then basically I have hook it up to the grid as well, and then I have an end-to-end system, and we should think about the whole system as a whole, not just a segmented, siloed parts of it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the future. And it's becoming more and more important because now within the last 4 years, the battery systems became so low cost that this is the best natural marriage to marry modules together with storage. At the moment, lithium batteries, maybe in future they will be replaced by solid phase batteries, which is already used in China. But that was, let's say, one of the missing pieces for photovoltaics, because until 5 years ago, photovoltaics could only produce electricity when the sun was shining, and then this smart grid was more or less constructed in Germany. These days is that batteries together with modules have now better chance to be applied also in standalone systems. And I completely agree. So-called energy management system, EMS, are becoming more and more important also for private households. And I know many friends now that had PV at home only, are now also installing batteries and trying to be even more independent from the grid.
Yeah, and it's not really a huge application or a huge need in Europe for us right now because the grid is quite okay and quite stable. But in other countries such as in the US or Australia, the grid is a little bit in a different shape. So you better have a backup, right?
Absolutely. And also in China. Now China is really amazing. They installed only last year, 300 gigawatt. To put it in perspective, 300 gigawatt was last year half of the total produced module capacity. 600 gigawatt were produced and China only installed half of it. And now the grid in China is also a little bit suffering because they have already a total installation of 1 terawatt. This is 1000 gigawatt. So they are also now installing more and more batteries and also wind power to, let's say, to balance the grid. And the batteries just came in the right time. That now PVs became so low cost that everybody wants to participate in the game. And now batteries are also the solution in many countries that can actually really make photovoltaic to grow the same way as it was growing in the past.
So basically, how far do you think we are in Europe from reaching the same, let's call it technology readiness as China in terms of, reaching saturation with the solar panels and projects basically before we really need to think about the large scale battery packs to balance it off?
I mean, we already are doing it. The challenge in Germany is also having electricity when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. And that's why, let's say, the strategy of our government is rather to build up many gas power stations, which I would not go for. It's rather to invest more into battery storage. And of course, in Germany, we have also other challenges, because it's not only day-night difference, but also the seasonal difference. So batteries is only one part of the final puzzle. We also have to have some energy which we can use in the winter time. Of course, we could increase the power of solar and wind in such a way that we have huge overcapacity in summer and then just the right capacity in winter. But this will still take many years. So that means one solution out of it to balance the day-night differences is, of course, batteries. And this is what is also happening in Germany these days. In addition, we need green hydrogen to balance the seasonal differences. And this is also one of the buzzwords that is out there, that green hydrogen will be the last puzzle piece into our CO2 neutral future to really use 100% renewables. That means you will have solar, wind, storage by batteries, and green hydrogen, and that's the whole story. But now coming still to your questions, I still can remember it. So indeed, in Germany, we still do not have such big challenges as in other countries because of our stable grid, but we are also going towards storages because of different reasons. We just want to be more independent.
And coming back to the hydrogen question, why do you think, or why don't you think that hydrogen really caught mass adoption of huge applications or for commercial scale yet?
Technology readiness level.
Okay.
So we are really at still not very low, but low technology readiness level. The efficiency that we are producing hydrogen from electricity is still quite low. There are also other challenges, for example, like transportation of hydrogen is not very easy. And that's why we are rather talking about methanol or other liquids that will be produced from the hydrogen. But let's say the major challenge is still the efficiency. But similar to batteries, the advancements are proceeding extremely fast. That means at the moment, it's still not efficient enough, but because many groups are working on it and it's a very hot topic, in the next coming years, we will come to a better efficiency, also to lower electricity prices. And I'm quite sure that similar to the batteries for day-night, balancing hydrogen will come also as the solution for the seasonal balancing.
I need to admit that I haven't been paying too much attention to hydrogen, but basically the efficiency gains year on year, do they also follow Moore's law, or what would you compare it to?
They are following, depending on the technologies that are being used, because let's say hydrogen production is also not hydrogen production, because you have different routes, how to make the electrolyte, and also different methods. But it's, I would similarly to what photovoltaics is examining.
Okay, so we talked about material science, we talked about technologies, we talked about manufacturing those technologies. Maybe the next topic we should look a little bit deeper into this whole geopolitical landscape and where we sit in Europe.
That's a very good question. So let's say there are two areas. We already talked a little about applications, about installations, about grid stability and things like that. And there is also the other side of the medal, which is production. And I think both of them are extremely important to have a fast energy transition, not only to have fast energy transition, also energy security, and also to secure the lowest electricity production in future, or energy production actually in the future, because now the energy consumption is more and more electrified. We are now going more towards electrical cars, and also the heating and cooling will be done in future more with electricity. So at the end, we will end up with 100% electricity production and 100% electricity usage. Maybe for transportation will still be hydrogen to be burned and things like that. But more or less, the energy transition is also a transition to electricity. And in order to be able to participate in a very fast energy transition in Europe, we need at the moment the technology from China, mostly also for the transition with photovoltaics. We are importing 90% of the panels from China. And there have been big discussions also in Europe in the past couple of years, in India and in US, that we should not only apply photovoltaics, but also produce. And the reasons are quite clear. You just cannot be dependent on one country when it comes to the future energy source. And India and US, they understood it completely. Yes, they must really start to subsidize the production of solar cells and modules in their country. In Europe, unfortunately, we are still discussing. And we somehow understood the urgency, but there are differences and urgent matters. At the moment, more urgent to electrify. The application is more urgent now. So in Europe, we did not install any import tariffs because we want to have cheap modules. And that's why the installations in Europe are growing quite quickly. But on the other hand, we should start producing the modules. And at the moment, it is only possible to start producing the modules when you have some incentives, some subsidies, and also some measures to make the modules more expensive, because you cannot start from scratch and compete with Chinese producers when they are already producing almost at a terawatt level at the moment. There are basically three countries, or let's say one continent. So it's US as a country. They have implemented so-called Inflation Reduction Act in place, which are some subsidies for module production, and they have also import tariffs in places. And that's why it is possible in US that production of solar cells and panels are now being initiated. Similar thing in India. They are even going faster, and they have implemented a so-called production-linked incentives, which are direct subsidies for the capex for production. That means for the factory, they get incentives, and also for the machines. In addition, they have also import tariffs that make the modules a little bit more expensive in their countries. But with these measures, it is possible in US and also in India to start production of cells and panels. At the moment, it is not possible in Europe to start production of PV components because, as I told you before, we don't have any import tariffs, and we have so far very weak incentives for production.
And I just spoke to a friend of mine an hour ago, and we were discussing about a similar topic, production and manufacturing in Europe. And he was saying that the last PV module manufacturer, when they left Sweden, they had a total headcount of 5,000 people working in the entire factory, right? At the same time, was it Longi? Only their R&D department is 100,000 people. So good luck catching up with that.
Yes. The R&D department is, 5,000 people, I think. Okay, it depends how you count Longi, because Longi have many products and so on. But in the past, they also had to reduce their R&D department because of the PV crisis at the moment. Nobody is making profit these days with the cheap modules. But you are completely right. There's a large number of R&D people in China working constantly also in gigawatt scale on optimizing the production. And in Europe, you still have a couple of institutes that still know how to produce solar cells also in gigawatt scale. There are a couple of hundreds, I would say.
And also, I assume, the real learning really comes from the mass production, right? Because there is one thing to simulate, producing a gigawatt of panels, and it's another thing to actually produce them and then thinking about the optimization of the entire process, right?
Yes, but nothing forbid us to learn from the Chinese, and this is what we are still constantly doing. But even the Chinese now have plans to come to Europe to support us with the starting PV production in Europe. And so, at the beginning, the Chinese has learned from us, from the production mostly in Germany, from the machine builders and from the institutes. And they just took the knowledge that we had in Europe to China and actually did what the Chinese can do the best, just transfer it to mass production and tweak every screw and really come to the highest efficiency limits. And now we just turn it around and benefit also from the Chinese findings and together set up PV production in Europe. And even if we take the Chinese technology, which at ISC we still have this knowledge because we are constantly developing also with our machine builders these technologies. But even if we take the best technology in Europe, we will be never able to produce at the cost level as the Chinese. It will be slightly higher costs of the panels always, even if we do it at gigawatt scale. But if you look what are the costs currently of the module in a whole system, this is marginal. So the levelized cost of electricity at the end, the cost for electricity that are coming out of the systems will be a very low per mil, very low percentage higher than using Chinese modules. I think this is what we have to have in mind. We have to participate in producing the modules in Europe, even if the electricity costs will be slightly higher than with the Chinese panels. It's all about energy security. It's all about working places in Europe. We are a technology continent. And in Germany, we are a technology country. So we still must participate in producing technology.
Indeed, it also rolls back to our previous point that we need to look at the whole system as an entire solution. As you mentioned, currently, what would be the percentage of the cost of the panel for a utility scale project? Out of 100 euros, how much would we be spending on panels?
So a panel these days you get for below 10 cents per watt peak. And just a fun fact, in China to produce this panel cost about 10 cents per watt peak. And then you also have to add transportation costs. So still the Chinese are selling to Europe below production costs. And this already since a very long time. So let's say if you assume a realistic price of 12 cents per watt peak, when the Chinese are also making profit from that, you can then calculate the percentage. And at the end, what I know from examples, for example, if you are producing a panel at maybe 3 or 4 cents per watt peak higher than it's produced in China, then the levelized cost of electricity costs will go, for example, from 4 cent per kilowatt hour to 4.3 cent per kilowatt hour. So it's only a fraction of the costs.
Can we define a levelized cost of electricity for those who don't know?
Yes. So the levelized cost of electricity is quite a complex equation, and it at the end gives you more or less how much are the costs for producing electricity in the system that you have built up. And what comes into the equation is, of course, how much you paid for the system, paid for modules, cabling, and so on. So it's so-called capex. It's the hardware of the PV systems. Then, of course, into the equation comes OPEX, which means the operational costs. For example, you have to clean its system. You have to, from time to time, exchange the modules if they, for example, got destroyed by hail or whatever. So the operational costs are in there, but also how the system is financed. What is your interest rate from the loan that you just got for the systems and so on. And this all together, you have to put into an equation. And at the end, you are calculating the system, for example, for 20 years lifetime. It gives you the costs that you are producing electricity.
Thank you. So we all know what it means. So all components put together, and then we actually have the cost of electricity that's being produced.
Yes. And if you, for example, I would say I take the world average numbers. And so there is this levelized cost of electricity table that's being calculated by Fraunhofer ISE, or Lazar is a very famous source of these calculations. Actual levelized cost of electricity numbers. So for solar at the moment and wind, they are at a very similar level. The average is about 3 cents per kilowatt hours levelized cost of electricity. Comparing it with nuclear, that is rather 10 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour, so much higher cost. But then, of course, the nuclear lobbyists are coming and saying, yeah, but you are cheating because you didn't apply in this numbers storage. So you are not producing electricity when your system needs it. So you don't calculate in your levelized cost of electricity, let's say the grid costs. But the interesting thing is now that even now the LCOE from solar together with storage are much, much lower than for nuclear. And I told you a number of 3 cents per kilowatt hour, and storage these days is adding about the same costs, which is now about 6 cents per kilowatt hours. And you can have even systems which are much cheaper than the 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So the lowest cost at the moment when you have storage combined with the PV is at about 4 cents per kilowatt hour, which are installed in sun-rich regions, Australia or in the MENA states. And
yeah, wow. So that's a lot of information, but it puts it really in perspective of where we stand, and with each year that cost is about to come down. So
yes,
basically, we already are the cheapest source of energy, but we will become even cheaper with time.
absolutely. At the moment, wind and solar are the cheapest sources. Let's say globally, it depends on the country where wind is lower cost, or solar, of course, depending on the conditions, on the weather conditions of the country. But after 3 or 4 years, PV will become the dominant energy source because it's still on a very fast learning curve. I'm not saying that we should use only photovoltaics. This will be complete nonsense because normally it comes together with wind for a good reason, because normally when the sun is shining, the wind is not blowing, and vice versa. So in Germany, especially, and other countries like Germany, a combination of wind and solar are just a perfect match.
And what do you think could stop us besides the politics, of course?
Yeah, I think the politics only. And, I just heard in the news from our Bundeskanzler, Mr. Merz. He was talking about climate protection, and he was talking, Germany, we have only 1% population. We are only responsible 2% for the global CO2 emission. And that's why we should not be so ambitious for going fast to renewable energies, because it doesn't make sense to be so fast. The others have to do it first. And I was completely shocked because, of course, in first place, it's about climate protection and also to be a role model for the others. But these days, it's about different things. It's about being leaders in the dominant energy technology and having in Germany the best technology, the lowest cost technology, which is obviously solar and wind. So going fast towards renewables, it's not only doing climate protection. It's being the technology leaders. It's having energy security in your country. And we just have to change the thinking of politicians somehow. I think that not all politicians are stupid. It's for a good reason. I think especially in Europe, it's about big lobbyism. So they have a big interest to somehow hold down renewable energy because there's still big lobby of nuclear in Europe, but especially also for oil and gas.
And also coming back to their point, okay, we are responsible for 1% of the CO2 emissions, right? But that's only if it stays at this level of production, because we don't have production in Europe. We couldn't make COVID masks. What if production comes back? Then the tables are really turned, and then we suddenly will have a huge surge in carbon production as a result of production.
Yes, I just didn't want to talk about this one, but you are completely right. If you make the calculation, because we let China produce the energy intensive products for us, also the panels. So if you would make the calculation, how much we are actually really emitting will be much more than 2%. It's really about technology and it's about energy security, full stop. And we should not continue to subsidize old energy sources or old car technology, like with combustion engine, then the future is already clear. It's renewable energy and it's electrical vehicles. Still, politicians in Europe and in Germany are talking about technology openness, but why to be technology open when the outcome is already clear?
Indeed. I mean, I'm watching the car numbers quite closely, and Tesla used to be the leader in Europe, and now you see even Volkswagen selling quite a few cars, but then you have BYD and all the other Chinese who are selling at a great price, and they are selling a great product, and that great product is actually better than the German cars. This is the problem. This is the real issue, that we are really painting ourselves in a corner.
Yeah. And that was already clear a couple of years ago, where also Minister Habeck was telling to Volkswagen, you must be ready to produce low-cost electrical cars. Somehow it took a long time for them to understand. They had a big crisis in US because of the diesel scandal, of course, but they should have invested money rather than cheating on a diesel engine into electrical cars. And that will be the solution. So there is also mismanagement of companies in Germany, but this is also politically driven because they somehow push them into being technology open and subsidize gas and subsidize some LNG, natürliche Kraftstoffe, this gas.
Yes, biodiesel. And
biodiesel or whatever, yes, rather to go into, so to still have the combustion engine out there for a couple of more years and not putting all into electric cars.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we will see a big turn soon. Besides, I partially understand their point of, there are around 16 million jobs linked to car production in Europe. Okay, that's always the case, that we are protecting the jobs. But if you don't innovate, somebody else will, and then it's not a bright future for us.
Yes, and I also can completely understand it that Germany wants to protect the car industry. And that's why they also put import tariffs on electric vehicles into Europe. And they are telling us since 20 years they just cannot put import tariffs on modules because of world trade mechanisms. But for cars, they of course can. I think protecting jobs in Europe would mean also go proactive into the areas which are the future. And this is electric cars. And we just did not, unfortunately.
Hopefully we will find a new technology where we can lead the race.
But this is what I'm saying. I mean, we don't need to have a technology which will lead the race. We just can adapt the technology that are made in China or produce in China and produce it in Europe as well. And this is also another discussion that we have in Europe, that we need something special, for example, also in the PV area to be competitive with Chinese producers. That's not the case. We can just really cooperate with China, or even, let's say, copy Chinese or learn from Chinese and produce it in Europe. And this will be the modules that are already at the market. It's TOPCon back contact, and produced in Europe. And as I said before, not to have the ambition to be cheaper as the Chinese producers, even to be a little bit, couple of cents higher costs than the Chinese producers. Then they have, of course, also transportation costs. So we could produce at a very similar prices than in China. But it's all about having the technology, energy security, and working places in Europe.
Indeed. And that's why the work of you guys is super important, and pushing the industry in the right direction.
Absolutely. And just to summarize, I think you had the question before, where PV modules will be produced in future. And the answer is, I'm quite sure Chinese will lead. They will lead the next 10, 15 years. They will produce a couple of terawatts of modules yearly in China. But I'm also quite sure that in US, India, and in Europe, we will at least produce PV module for our self-consumption. That means not at terawatt level, but at 3-digit gigawatt level. So for example, in US, 100 gigawatt module cells and wafer ingot. Same thing in India, maybe more than 100 gigawatt. And in Europe, we will need also 100 gigawatt for our self-consumption yearly, maybe more. And I'm quite sure that we will reach to that situation that we will be able to do that. And Europe is going into this direction. There is the Net Zero Industry Act, which was put out there from the European Union. In the last year, we have been discussing how we can start PV production in Europe. And the outcome is the so-called Net Zero Industry Act, where you have also some subsidies included there. But for the first time in PV history, it is possible in Europe to subsidize PV products, which was not possible in the past. But now each member state has to come up with their own models. The EU Commission just created the framework, and now each country can say, okay, for example, in Germany, because we are producing inverters, now similar to the car industry in Germany is now allowed to support inverter production. And this is what they will do, also because of cybersecurity. In Italy, there is production of cells and modules, and that's why, like by NL, and that's why Italy is also going for supporting their module production. And I think France will also go the same way. So now it will be dependent on the countries, which PV components they plan to support in future. And I'm quite sure that at the end, we will come to this 100 gigawatt production environment in Europe. But unfortunately, it is going too slow. I would rather see a faster solution, but at the end, we will come to this production environment, even in Europe. And that's why I'm still optimistic, about this localization of PV production worldwide.
We have our work cut out for sure. And it's really important to have the know-how of how to do this and bring it back to Europe to a certain extent, at least, as you mentioned, for self-consumption. So thank you very much for your work, for putting all this effort, all these years into this. If you wanted to meet any type of people who could help you on your journey, on your research, what kind of people would you like to hear from?
That's a good point. I actually would not like to meet people from research, but investors and politicians. So I have been involved now at ISC Konstanz for 20 years in technology. So I was the CTO together with my team developing solar cells very close to the industry. Now, since 1 year, I have a different role, looking more into strategy and education. And education does not necessarily mean students or PhD students, because this is what we are doing anyhow. It's more education of public, politicians, but also training of engineers in gigawatt factories. So from my perspective, that PV will become the dominating electricity technology in future is a no-brainer. It will come. But I just would like to inform the politicians that like to know and are not somehow paid under the table by the lobbyist, that it is really now time to invest into renewable technologies, not to be dependent on the imports from the outside. And also to inform investors that even if so far the PV production in Germany failed, we have just burned ground at the moment, because just the last producer filed insolvency. Meyer Burger was producing in Germany and now they stopped. And the message out there for investors and politicians is, okay, Meyer Burger didn't succeed in Europe and that's why it's not possible to produce in Europe. It's not true. When you invest in new technologies out there, in new machines that are produced also by the German machine builders, and have a solid business plan, and also have this protected market as in US, and having also subsidies and in US, in India, it is possible to have a business case in Germany. And this is what we must work on. So meeting investors, politicians, sit together and creating this business case in Europe, this would be ideal for me.
I hope all of those guys will be listening to this podcast. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. And maybe one last question to wrap up. What's the best way to reach out to reach ISC Konstanz?
So ISC Konstanz, definitely we have a very good web page that you can look at what products we are offering. So at the moment, we just spoke about cells and modules, but we are also doing development in storage, hydrogen, and energy systems, also looking at AgriPV and smart grid solutions, more or less like helping since 20 years the global energy transition. You can call me. You can reach me via LinkedIn. And since 1 year, I have also a TikTok account. And the TikTok account is basically there also because of my role now to reach out to the public, to politicians, to inform about photovoltaics, about the exponential growth, about the decrease of costs of photovoltaics.
Link to all of those in the show notes below. And on that note, Ravovan, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. It's been a great pleasure. Let's hope we can do this soon again. And thank you very much and have a good one.
Thank you very much, Peter. And see you next time.
See you.